Thank you, sir, for now. Let's go to London. Ali Shahabi, analyst of all things Saudi Arabia. Ali, thanks for being with us. We appreciate your time. I'm letting you loose to tell us why this is important, why this visit of Xi Jinping to Saudi Arabia means so much to the Saudi Arabians. Tell us why.
Well, like any business, your largest customer is extremely important. And China is the largest customer of Saudi oil. Now, that has developed also into Saudi investments in petrochemicals and refineries in China, Chinese investments in the refining sector in Saudi Arabia, very large amounts of trade. And there is a military relationship that began in 1990 that has been energized over the last 5 years in sort of niche areas, particularly ballistic missiles and in drones. And of course, China is a country that has weight with other Middle Eastern countries like Iran, and that carries its own benefits also, because the Chinese are seen as being a positive influence on Iran. It's in China's interest for the Gulf to be stable. They get such a large percentage of their oil from the Gulf. So for all these things, really, and the multipolarity that the Saudi government under King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed is pursuing, which realizes that while America will retain its importance and will always be an important partner, America is less reliable than it used to be in terms of its commitment to security, its commitment to deploy forces, its willingness to take these sort of risks. And so while nobody can replace America exactly, you can replace America partially in different ways by building different relationships with different powers across the world, primarily, obviously, China and India and Russia and the UK and France and Europe. So all that comes together, really. I mean, this is a visit that really is crowning a very strong strategic relationship that has developed over the last few years. So it's really the cherry on the cake, if you want. I mean, it's a confirmation that the relationship has become very close. And I think that is an irreversible step on behalf of Saudi Arabia, really.
Ali, thank you. We wait to see how that cake turns out and how it tastes. But of course, we can talk more about that as we go through the debate. Thank you, sir, for giving us that sense of how this is being seen. Ali Shihabi on this one. Ali is in London, a Saudi analyst. Excuse me, Ali, hope you can hear me. I wanted to get your thoughts on how the strategic relationship is going forward between Saudi Arabia and China. Because going back to when Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia, he was looking to try to get crude oil production increased. Now, would anybody be surprised if an OPEC member protected another OPEC member by saying, no, we're not going to do that, Mr. Biden? That would be Saudi Arabia protecting Russia. Russia, of course, being, some people would say today, a terrorist state, given what it's done in Ukraine. But Saudi Arabia choosing to protect it because it suited them to protect it, because Saudi Arabia would make more money if there's no more increase of crude oil production.
Well, I mean, Saudi Arabia is protecting itself, because the Saudi economy's lifeblood is oil. And OPEC Plus brings in Russia because Russia is the second largest producer and exporter of oil in the world. So that strategic relationship between Saudi Arabia and Russia is essential to maintain stability in oil markets. And in fact, the Americans, when oil went to zero, if you'll remember, in the early days of COVID, and they panicked about their oil industry, put immense pressure on Saudi Arabia to cooperate with Russia to bring the price of oil back up. So it's not something, the Saudi-Russian relationship is not something that Saudi Arabia can play with, because it is key to maintaining the lifeblood of its own economy. And it's finance, and it has financing needs, and it has massive development requirements. And that means it needs to maintain the price of oil in a stable, acceptable range for its development plans.
So, Ali, can I just build on that one by asking if you see a comparison, or maybe even an equivalence in the relationship between China and Saudi Arabia and that between China and Russia? Because when Russia invaded Ukraine and there were problems regarding where the oil gets sold, a big deal was done with China to sell that oil and to keep basically the war chest filling up for Vladimir Putin with that deal that was signed with China. Is there a kind of similarity between the two relationships, you think?
Well, I mean, there's a similarity with China's relationship and with India's relationship also with Russia. I mean, India continues to buy oil from Russia and maintain a neutral relationship on the Ukraine conflict. Saudi Arabia has excellent relationships with Ukraine, has given the Ukrainian government substantial aid, has voted actually with it in the UN, but at the same time realizes that it has to maintain the strategic relationship in OPEC Plus to keep oil markets stable and oil prices in an acceptable range to finance its development also.
It sounds like a real moral dilemma. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, every country pursues its self-interest. And I must say, with all due respect to Western countries, they dispense with moral dilemmas very easily when their key national security interests come into play. So ultimately, politics are your interests, and morality becomes a virtue play that politicians use, but your interests determine foreign policy and determine your policy. And you have to maximize and preserve the interests of your country, and that is what Saudi Arabia is doing.
Ali Shihabi in London for now. Thank you very much indeed, sir. Let's go back to Washington, where from the Council of Foreign Relations, reflection on that one. Ali, earlier we were talking about the kind of realpolitik or Machiavellian nature of some of these discussions. And what we've just been talking about here in the studio is how certain things that are extremely delicate dossier to discuss, like the Uyghurs, like what happened, the horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi, these things will basically not be mentioned at all in these discussions. Isn't that basically to the shame of everybody that happens?
Well, I think there's an understanding between countries like Saudi Arabia and China that certain issues get discussed privately and not publicly. I think a lot of Western politicians selectively pick their morality subjects according to what has a minimal political cost to them domestically. So, I mean, the murder of Jamal was horrible, and it was a crime, and the Saudi government accepted its responsibility for that. But there are many, many crimes committed by all sorts of countries, including close allies of the US and Europe, that are not mentioned or are mentioned, in a very minor manner compared to something like Mr. Khashoggi's murder, which took place 4 years ago. So I think the Saudi government pursues a policy, which the Chinese government does also, which is that on these sort of sensitive issues, it discusses them privately with China. And, of course, the Saudi government is concerned about the Muslim population in China. But at the same time, China is virtually a superpower. And you have to be careful how you manage that issue with them. They have national security interests, and you have to respect that. So that issue and any related issues will be discussed privately. And there certainly will be no political posturing like you might get in other countries.
Are you saying to me, Ali, that there will be some straight talking going on, that some home truths will be mentioned, that, for instance, Mohammed bin Salman might say to Xi Jinping, look, lay off our Muslim brothers and leave them alone?
Well, I mean, this issue has been discussed before. And I mean, it was actually mentioned in one of Prince Mohammed's visits to China previously. So, I mean, there is concern. They talk about it. The Chinese have their point of view. They provide evidence, and the dialogue goes on. Now, I'm not privy to what goes on in those rooms, but I know that these things happen discreetly and not on the television screens. It's as simple as that.
Ali, thank you very much indeed. Jean-Baptiste Monnier, Shihabi, can I bring you back in from London, Saudi analyst, to give us a sense of how you feel this visit is going to go over the next 3 days? We're getting towards the dying seconds of our debate, sir. Give us your sense of how you think it will go.
No, I think it'll go very well because, I mean, as I said, it's a culmination of a very strong relationship that has already been put in place. So it will be, the symbolism really of it will be very important because it will be confirming the existence of a very strong strategic relationship between the kingdom and between China.
And does that strategy give Washington something to fear? Does it give Europe something to fear? Or is it an opportunity?
I don't think it gives them much to fear. Some may be concerned about it, and there are issues sometimes about technology. The Americans have issues, for example, with 5G and Chinese technology, and Saudi Arabia has to make some hard decisions in that area. But Saudi Arabia will concurrently maintain very strong ties with Europe and with America to the extent that American political circumstances allow. But I think the issue with America is the structure of its political system. And the vagaries that develop through their electoral cycle that make their dependence on them, something that Saudi Arabia cannot afford to do anymore. Total dependence on them.
Indeed. Ali, you mentioned 5G. We can see Huawei's headquarters in France just over the river from the Seine, from our offices. So it is something that is very much a topic on many people's minds. Ali Shihabi in London, thank you for the moment.